I originally titled my piece Recollections of Growing Up in South Haven, but I'm not very good at headlines. If Tom Renner's here, he'll know that. We used to work together on the Tribune. So I've called it Then and Now, with a slight nod to Bill Bryson. In this day when parents are afraid to let their kids play outdoors, when they drive them to and from school and enroll them in endless organized athletic and cultural programs, it's kind of fun to remember growing up in South Haven in the 1940s and 50s. I lived at 808 Superior Street, a tiny brick two-bedroom house facing Hubbard. We were next to a ravine, one house from a vacant lot, and a block and a half from Hartman School, and we were free to roam. The ravine was a mysterious delight, dark and dank, with a bubbling creek through its middle and huge trees around its rim. We dabbled in the creek, once actually following it through culverts and into other ravines until it spilled out into the Celery Flats and ultimately the Black River. Our trousers were soaked to the kneecaps. We climbed the trees, and from the tops we could see all the way to US 31 to the east. Thick, gnarled grapevines hung from some of the trees, and we would swing on them out over the ravine like juvenile acrobats. Yahoo! My bedroom faced the Hubbard Street corner, and on Friday nights, when the Rams played at home, I would watch, fascinated, as director Mike Listiak's precise and disciplined band wheeled around the corner on its way to Ratcliffe Field. Ta-dum, dum, da-dum, dum, dum. Later, when I got to go to the games, I would dash home afterwards, wheeling through the departing crowd, pretending I was one of the Rams' elusive running backs. Pabuda, Dykstra, Kimbrough, Pratt. I ultimately got to play on that field as a member of the team, but I wasn't very good. My specialty was place kicking, and it was because of that vacant lot. It sat between the Olsons and the Hovers' houses, and it stretched from the street all the way back to the Olson brothers' construction garage. Just big enough to plant goalposts made of sassafras trees and half-berry frozen orange juice cans at various distances and practice kicking field goals. We used a rubber football, slightly deflated to improve the punch, and those cans served as tees. It seemed like we were hitting 50-yarders, but it was probably more like 20 or 30. Elmer Olson built a backstop for the small ball diamond at the north end of that lot. Art Roderick and I would pitch to each other for hours, pretending to be various professional players, imitating their stances and their moves. We used tennis balls, and I developed a wicked drop ball by compressing the ball with my knuckles and then springing them loose as I let go, imparting a rapid downward spin. It was unhittable. Well, almost unhittable. At night, we played cowboys and Indians up and down the block. We made makeshift teepees, and we hung flashlights from the tops to light the interiors. We shot baskets at Wayne Fritz's garage. We built small cardboard cities at the back end of Alan Payson's place. And then we struck matches and burned them down. There was a ramshackle hovel on the Porter property behind us. We were sure our hermit lived there. Shades of Boo Radley. I drive through the old neighborhood when I'm in town. It's changed, of course. We all have. The vacant lot has been built upon. Somebody else lives in our little house. Hartman School is now the Historical Museum. But the ravine is still there, full of brush and branches, and the creek. Sometimes, if I look closely, I think I can see a small boy with a stick looking for frogs.
JESSUP, who rode trains when he was a kid. Mel, do you want to stand up? I thought you were going to dress up in your engineer's outfit for me.
I'm retired.
Okay, all right. All right, so this is told to me by Mel JESSUP. He's a railroad man, through and through. Retired now, but still a railroad man. Mel JESSUP met me at Julia's for coffee one summer afternoon. He wore a bill cap that could have been an engineer's hat, just like he has tonight, the way it sat in his head. In fact, when the boy became the man, he was an engineer. Before the man, there was the boy who started riding the South Haven trains at 8 or 9. He told me of his lifelong love of trains. Of course, as a little kid, he had a model train that traveled around his room. And there never seemed to be a time that railroads weren't in his life. His love seemed to be born in his genes. His grandfather, his mother's father, was a roadmaster, which is like a civil engineer who worked on the Michigan Central. His father worked on railroads, but was also a school teacher that many of you may know, Howard JESSUP. 2-week school vacations were always included on a trip to visit trains. His best memory as a boy, the train whistle that the train was in at the depot. The depot then is the depot now, but now it's a liquor store, not the train depot. On Dykeman, just before you go over the bridge to the lake. He'd call to his mother he was leaving, hop on his bike, and head for the train depot. He said his mother never worried. The crew knew his father, and she knew Mel would be safe. He had an allowance, so maybe he'd grab a sandwich at the restaurant at the depot, or maybe he had a candy bar in his pocket. He'd hop the train and ride all day long. In the late 50s, he said families would gather and ride in the caboose or the engine and ride back and forth between South Haven and Kalamazoo. There were no passenger cars then. By 15 or 16, he was so observant on, how the train operated and everything, he was running the switch engines. He said if you had a relative on the railroad, you had a job. The men worked the trains, the women on accounts in the office. Railroads owned their own hospital, steel mills, their own mineral rights, and they owned mine ships. Every summer vacation, he worked on the railroad. In 1965, he worked a narrow gauge railroad in Colorado. As an adult, he collected steam engine memorabilia, bell whistles, bells, headlights, and as an adult, he worked as a fireman and an engineer. The last train in South Haven ran in 1986. South Haven, he said, didn't want railroads. They wanted tourism. Short track lines were abandoned, but Mel knew insurance contracts and how to set up a rail business. He'd graduated from Ferris in business administration and traffic engine design. He worked building railroad terminals during the Vietnam War, 13 different railroads. He was called a boomer. When he was laid off, he would work one and then another wherever they were hiring. The larger big lines went bankrupt. 10,000 miles of rail no longer operated, but there was still a need for the short line railroads. Smaller communities were not served. He won contracts to operate 275 miles of railroad from Pennsylvania and Michigan Northern. Short lines were needed for the Midwest grain elevator business. There were 28 to 30 grain towns in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Colorado, and Kansas that still needed the service. In spring, the trains moved the fertilizer. In summer, they moved the grain. He's seen a bit of everything from the train. One time, a trail of shoes, socks went out the baggage door, followed by a kid who jumped at 80 miles per hour, naked in minus 20-degree weather in the middle of the night in February. There happened to be no snow on the ground, but he hit the only snowbank around, miraculously not hurt. No scratches, no broken bones, and a couple found him wandering on a back road later. Turned out he was schizophrenic and he got nervous on the train and jumped. Mel has also seen drunks and people who have committed suicide by laying on the tracks. One couple jumped off on their 50th wedding anniversary in the middle of Indiana. They were on the train route that was their old honeymoon trip. The wife, it turned out, had 6 months to live. She jumped, and then her husband, who wanted to go with her, went at the same time. They left a letter to the family explaining. There were also bums and hobos. The distinction was bums wouldn't work, hobos would. They rode the rails to find work. They'd swing a bailing hook at the train, which was going 50 miles an hour, to catch the side of the car and then swing up. Markings on posts outside of the house were messages to other bums or hobos. Kilroy was here. 2 bars get food and lodging. 1 bar meant food and help. 3 bars, not of the church. I forgot what that means. You'll have to ask Mel later. To this day, there is an official parade and festivities in Britt, Iowa in the summer for the gathering of the hobos. If you're interested, Google it. Mel sees a need for railroad being resurrected when Palisades has to dismantle their plant. The generator is 175 tons. He sees the railroad as the only way to haul them, as there are restrictions of moving them over water due to the nuclear waste laws. Warren Buffett must think there's a need for the railroad, Mel told me, as he bought the Burlington Santa Fe line as an investment for $15 billion. Billion, not million. Though Mel graduated from operating steam engines to diesel engines and worked for Amtrak, he's still fascinated with the steam engine. May 2019, the sesquicentennial, the Union Pacific is going to run the Golden Spike. Union Pacific Railroad is overhauling the biggest steam engine ever built called Big Boy. On May 2019, they will run it. Mel will take his grandchildren out of school for the event. Like I said, he's a railroad man through and through.
How I transitioned from a city troll to a rural youper to a Soha beach boy. In 1975, I inherited my grandparents' home and business in Menominee, Michigan, after getting out of the military. I'd only visited this place for a few weeks every summer as a kid, and living there was a much different task. My young family moved up, built an A-framed house with laminated wood beams, and took over their guide and hunting business. The whole project happened at a very convenient time for me and was a life-changing event. But becoming a youper was a whole new experience, eh? Here's how it happened. We were sleeping soundly when an unknown noise seemed to reverberate through the house. Not necessarily as sound waves, it came through the bones of the A-frame house like a moan and a groan. Living in the rural Upper Peninsula for such a short time, we were frightened of nearly everything, especially at night. The UP darkness can penetrate right into your mind. So we stayed huddled in the dark and whispered to each other, "What in the world is that?" "Maybe nothing, just lay quietly." "It's 5 a.m., my wife whispered. "We won't be able to get back to sleep. Go see what it is." There it was again, a groaning rumble that surged through the house. This time we felt it move too. Could it be an earthquake? Portions of Michigan are in a Type 5 earthquake zone, and I did not know that prior to moving to the UP. The building trembled and groaned again as if a team of ghosts were inhabiting it, some moaning and some shaking. The wailing lament sounded as if it were leaking from the massive beams that framed the house. My first instinct was to pull the covers over my head and wait it out, but this was not an option according to my better half. So I courageously got up, picked up one of Grandpa's snowshoes and a small wooden stool that Grandpa had made for our toddler to stand on in front of the toilet. The stool had a hand-sized hole in the top, and I picked it up and held the legs out like a lion tamer. I heard it again, and I felt it again. The circular stair swayed slightly as I descended from the loft bedroom. I peered out the glass in the end of the A-frame toward the porch. The porch across the end of the house and the handrail were trembling, swaying, and moving every few seconds with the accompanying groans of the ghostly presence. Pulling the slider open, I moved out onto the porch, dressed in my sweatpants, an old hoodie with the sleeves cut off a la Bill Belichick, and my Star Wars Wookiee slipper socks pulled up over the pant legs. I looked sort of like a weird Don Quixote or a lion tamer who was going in to see a fat, slow lion with very short legs. There, with his budding, felted horns stuck through and locked between the balusters of the porch, was a yearling moose. Every 10 seconds or so, he pulled heartily, trying to free himself, and the effort strained and shook the whole house. A yearling moose can weigh between 600 and 800 pounds, and this one was near the top of that scale. He'd been scraping his horns on the railing and trying to reach a basket of apples that had been stored out there. Somehow he'd gotten his head and horns through in a vertical fashion and then turned his head and locked himself in like a cow in a milking stanchion. His front legs were rigid, his hooves driving into the frozen ground, his tail and butt down and rear legs straining to pull his head free. His eyes were wide open and he was terrified, as was I. With every rapid breath, he snorted steam into the cool air, and he became ever more likely to destroy the deck. Moving closer, I realized, unluckily enough, he had broken through the deck at a structural vertical which was tied to one of the projecting floor beams, and he was beginning to pull it free from the top plate, holding it to the foundation. If he succeeded in pulling the bolts loose, he could actually collapse the floor and potentially the whole house. "Oh, he's so cute," Pam cooed behind me. "Yeah, right, he's destroying our new house, and that's not cute. How am I going to get him out of here before he tears the house down? How was I going to move an 800-pound object without a crane? How about a live 800-pound terrified object?" A light came on. I quickly ran inside and came out with my rifle. If I shot him first, I could cut the horns off with a saw, get them mounted, get the meat processed, claim my inner hunter had emerged, and I'd hunted him down. That would impress my new Youper neighbors who thought we were sissified city bumblers. "You can't shoot him. Don't kill him. He's just scared. He's not doing it on purpose. And it's not moose season yet." How else am I going to stop him? It seemed to me now that he was even more terrified, and moose and people are not compatible. So I ran down the basement, grabbed an old anchor line rope, and exited through the cellar door and came around behind him. Maybe if he couldn't see me, he might calm down. As I approached, I thought I might be able to loop the line over his head to the far horn, pull his head to one side, align the horns with the vertical opening he had made, and get him free. As I got closer, I was suddenly impressed with how big a moose actually is. I'm 6 feet tall and about 215, and I just was about the size of one of his front legs. Maybe if you talk quietly to him, he would calm down. "Okay, but be careful," was the retort. Yeah, well, the best way for me to be safe would have been to shoot him. At least he wouldn't be moving the house and wouldn't be yanking apart my deck. I couldn't get near him from the ground, and he could smell me without seeing me, so he got even more distressed, the huge hoof slamming into the ground as he yanked backward, trying to free himself. I went up the stairs and came back out onto the deck. Get some of the apples and roll them over toward him to distract him, while I try to loop the rope over his head to the far horn and turn his rack vertically. "What? I'm not doing that. I can't get close enough until he calms down. Just do it and talk softly to him. If he's focused on you and calms down, I think we can get him out. So the apple rolling and begging began. Roll them farther to his left, then he'll turn his head that way to eat them. If you want to do this, just come on over and do it. I need to be the rope man. Just keep talking to him and feeding him, and don't get too close. An apple rolled just to his left, and while he couldn't see it, he could smell it. His tactile lips quivered and puckered as though he thought he could charm the apple over to him. He slowly rolled his head a little to the left, and the lips extended like prehensile little arms toward the apple. Finally, he rolled it a little further to the left, trying for the apple. Perfect. I looped the rope over the far horn like a lasso and pulled, trying to turn his head the last quarter turn. He pulled his head back hard the other way, and I fell to my hands and knees with a thud and let go of the rope. I could have used him on my tug-of-war team in college. Another apple in the right place distracted him, and I grabbed the rope and ran it around a baluster end post and held on. He pulled back, but now I was sitting on the deck with my feet braced against the baseboard, and he had less leverage. He finally stopped pulling against the rope and settled into eating the apple. While seated, I looped the rope around my waist and braced my feet on the base of the rail so I could use my legs to try to turn his head the final quarter turn. Inch by inch, I was getting there. His strength was unreal as he pulled against me. I'm out of apples, was the next quote of my project. I tied off the looped rope with an easily removable sailor's knot and leaned to the side to get the apple nearest the moose's head. As I leaned toward him, the line was not so taut, and he turned his head into it rather than resisting it. Suddenly he was free. His pent-up energy and terror released, and he jerked backwards, shattering the railing. This pulled the line taut and jammed the knot into the gap between the baluster and the post. He snorted and ran off to the woods, yanking the railing and me off the deck. As he ran, the balusters broke free, beating me around the head and arms as he dragged me toward the woods. The rope rode up from my waist under my arms, removing the skin along each rib. The string broke on my sweatpants, and they peeled down the trail behind me, held on at the ankles by the slipper socks. I was bouncing along the ground like a fallen skier on a steep slope. Bushes, shrubs, grass, and weeds barbed and gnashed at my chest, ribs, thighs, and feet. At about 25 yards, the final baluster broke free, the knot came loose, and I skidded to a stop. My sweatshirt was shredded, my pants trailed out behind me, and I felt as if I were a filleted fish. The moose stopped at the edge of the woods and looked back toward the house just to snort at me. Now I was the one moaning and whining. If only I'd shot him, it would have been so easy. My wife approached slowly and keeping her eyes on the spot where the moose had entered the woods. Are you okay? No, I'm not. I should have shot that stupid moose. She helped me to my feet. We better get you to the clinic. I'm not going anywhere near the clinic, I was saying. No way any of our new neighbors are going to know about this. I'd be permanently branded an ignorant troll. Almost 8 months later, Finn, a fourth-generation Youper and now one of our Northland Adventure fishing guides, and I were guiding some folks from down below into one of the most beautiful hidden lakes in the Upper Peninsula. As we were portaging our canoes in a swampy area, he stopped when we came across a single moose antler. The antler was huge and had been broken off at the base. He picked it up, and displaying it, we could see a rope had once been looped around the horn. The bottom end was frayed where it had been chewed off, while the horn had literally grown in around the loop end, making it look like a grotesque earring. Appalled, he said, "Look at this. Some troll must have decided he could rope a moose." I bet he got a Uber education now, don't you? Moose antlers decorate our home and at Northern Adventure Fishing and Hiking Camp and are featured on all of our brochures. Telling nature stories at the fire pit below the house is a strong part of our traditional camper's experience, eh? The centerpiece of the display is a large antler with a rope growing through, somewhat resembling an earring. But of all the stories that get told about the antlers and the moose that grow them, there is one that never gets told.
And Dr. Liberty Hyde Bailey talks about dandelions, and I was reading up on him, but I'm no authority on dandelions, so don't ask me any questions. He says, where once were weeds are now golden coins, scattered in the sun, and the bees are reveling in color. I must admit there's something about these happy bright flowers which attract me, but not in our garden, and not in our yard, and not between the bricks in our driveway. How about you? And to quote A.A. Milne, author of Winnie the Pooh, he says, weeds are flowers too, once you get to know them. And I'm going to present some information which might help you get to know dandelions better and maybe appreciate them as a welcome flower instead of a dreaded weed. I will cover a little history, some medicinal uses, some ways to consume dandelions besides wine, for folklore, and lastly, some hints as how to get rid of them, if I haven't convinced you that they should stay. The dandelion is grown in many countries. Some names translate to butterflower, the flower that grows in public places by the riverside, a blowing seed, referring to the cottony seed, and in the United States, lion's teeth, referring to the indented leaves. Supposedly, the colonists brought dandelions here to provide food for imported honeybees, and today they do attract beneficial aphids and ladybugs to our gardens. Botanically, it's a member of the aster family. Because of their value to mankind, dandelions are listed as medicinal in the U.S. National Formulary, and I had to look that up. It's an organization which establishes standards for medicine and food ingredients and other things. To strengthen the entire body will reduce swelling and help prevent jaundice, consume a mixture of ground, dried roots, and water. A flour solution can work as a mild diuretic, but it doesn't leach the valuable potassium from our bodies like some diuretics do. The mixture is good for just about any organ you can name: pancreas, gallbladder, stomach, liver, even the intestines. Its properties help treat anemia, arthritis, hepatitis, and many other things. Most importantly, medicines made from dandelions have no side effects and don't interact with other medicines. Even the white sap in the stems has been documented as useful for removing warts, moles, pimples, calluses, whatever. I wonder, do the health food stores carry any dandelion products? And if you don't have a medicinal need, the flour mixture can function as a facial. Or better yet, add a little sugar and the fruit juice and let it ferment for a time. And finally, enjoy a mild, smooth wine. How about dandelion flower fritters, or just adding them to salads? And this brings me to share other ways to consume these precious yellow coins, as Dr. Bailey calls them. Cut into small pieces, roasted and ground, roots can be made into a coffee substitute, which is healthier than the real stuff. If you let the roots soak in water for a couple of hours to reduce the bitterness, they can be combined with sweet vegetables like carrots and added to soups or stews. And don't forget the leaves. The early spring leaves, picked when they are more tender and not too bitter, can be added to salads or sautéed and served as a vegetable. And did you know that the leaves contain more beta-carotene than carrots and more iron than spinach, plus a healthy portion of calcium? Are you convinced yet? Dandelion folklore has some interesting offerings too. Romantically, the soft cottony seeds, when blown from the globe into the wind, carry whispered words of love. And if all the seeds leave, the love is very strong. If some remain, well, there's reason to doubt the strength of the relationship. Long ago, dandelions served as shepherd's clocks. Supposedly, the flower opens at 5 a.m. and closes at 8 p.m. Dandelions are quite accurate barometers. When the weather is sunny, the seed globe is open to the fullest, and when it's raining, the globe is closed like an umbrella. And when the weather is iffy, the globe remains closed until the good weather returns. As a kid, didn't you make necklaces or halos by stringing the hollow stems together and twisting a few flowers on for a little color? Or do you remember holding a flower under your chin to determine if you like butter or not? So now we come to the information I promised about how to get rid of these weed flowers, even though I have tried to give you some reasons not to. Hal Borland, a noted nature writer, laments, "You fight dandelions all weekend, and late Monday afternoon, there they are, pert as all get out, in full and gorgeous bloom, pretty as can be, thriving as only dandelions can in the face of diversity." And not surprising, since the dandelion's motto, if flowers have motto, is reputed to be never say die. But most likely you have tried to eliminate these flowers/weeds. It's like trying to stop the wind. Have you tried using that long digging tool, which turns out not to be long enough? And routinely it leaves part of the root in the ground, which of course grows to another plant. Not real good. And certainly pulling the young leaves to starve the roots is a thankless, never-ending job. Might as well spray them with Roundup. But remember Bob Villa from the Old House on TV? He recommends when the warm weather comes, mix a half a cup of table salt with a half a gallon of vinegar and spray your yard. Supposedly one application will do it. I have no guarantees. Maybe you shouldn't be so quick to destroy this valuable flower we call a weed. The October 3rd, 2018 issue of the Wall Street Journal, maybe some of you saw this, had a headline that said, "Dandelions ruin your yard, but could be the future of rubber." Yes, a cousin of the dandelion, currently growing only in Kazakhstan, was used in World War I to produce rubber. Scientists in the Netherlands, United States, Russia, Czech Republic, and I would guess other countries are researching ways to make the plant grow faster, survive in other areas of the world, and be more prolific, and not be so susceptible to disease, so it can be used, maybe to make rubber and other things. Maybe we should start giving these gold coins the respect they deserve. Am I ready to accept them in our yard, driveway, and garden? I'm trying. Remember, when you look at a field of dandelions, you can either see a field of weeds or a field of dreams. And I'll close with some more wisdom from Dr. Bailey. The man who worries morning and night about the dandelions in the lawn will find great relief in loving dandelions. Think about it.
There's a lighthouse standing on the end of the pier, like a mother watching o'er her child.
Okay, next up, we have Cindy Murphy. And I call this piece part of the new history. You know, we have the history of the past, but today, you know, will be in the future. This will be the history of the future. And it's tied to Lake Michigan, and you can't think of South Haven without thinking of Lake Michigan. And this is a particular poignant memory of Cindy's about Lake Michigan. Cindy?
I don't know if y'all know anything about this book. It was put out by the Historical Association maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, but it's stories, photographs, and poetry written about the lighthouse when they were trying to raise money to save the lighthouse. So this is my story from this book. It's called Perfect Timing. A lighthouse's official duty is to guide ships in darkness and storms. The South Haven Lighthouse performed its duties well for more than a century, providing a comforting light to those who navigate Lake Michigan's sometimes treacherous waters. The lighthouse's unofficial duties are just as important. It has served as a beacon of hope to many trying to navigate through life, It's a trusted confidant, never giving up the secrets it's heard, and vows to try harder, be stronger, love more, and hate less. It's seen tears of joy and of sorrow. It has witnessed countless first kisses and at least one last goodbye. It was a cold weekend in late July when my brother, his ex-wife, and kids pulled up to our house for their annual summer visit to South Haven. Getting out of his truck, my brother Bobby yelled across the yard, "I brought Mike!" Mike was our little brother. He was the baby of the family, 6 years my junior and 5 years younger than Bob. We had always been a tight-knit trio of siblings, but because Mike was so much younger, he endured a lot of teasing growing up, which continued good-naturedly into our adult years. It had been a little over a year prior that we learned Mike had cancer, and 2 months after that he died. He was growing restless just sitting in a box on the dresser, according to Bob, and he wanted to release our brother's ashes into Lake Michigan. I learned much later that there are regulations against regarding the releasing of cremation remains into bodies of water. None of us knew that at the time, though, and Lake Michigan seemed like the most natural place to lay Mike to rest. Though we grew up on the other side of the state, nearly every family vacation when we were kids was spent camping along our shoreline. The tradition of spending vacations at the lake continued into adulthood when my husband and I moved to South Haven, and all my family gathered at our home each. We walked down to the beach Saturday evening under gray, cloudy skies and in high winds, a family procession consisting of 4 adults and 4 children. The weather had been unseasonably cool for a couple of weeks. It felt more like early October than late July. For a summer weekend during tourist season, the beach was relatively empty due to the cold. The big digital thermometer on the concession stand read air temperature 54 degrees, water temperature 52 degrees. Nobody was in the lake except for 2 surfers in wetsuits, ignoring the red flags signaling rough, dangerous waters. Few people walked the Lighthouse Pier. There was no glorious Lake Michigan sunset to see with the sky so cloudy, although bright yellow rays broke through the clouds, streaming into the water. The setting and the timing, it was perfect to do what we wanted to do. Even the wind was cooperating, blowing diagonally across the pier instead of head-on. Mike's ashes would be carried out across the water rather than back into our faces. We walked beyond the lighthouse to the very end of the pier. I looked at Bobby and saw he was crying. Somehow I hadn't expected that all this time later, and it got very emotional for everyone. My husband held the box. I took a handful of ashes and slowly let them run through my fingers, watching the cloud of dust swirl over the lake. Amid a lot of tears and hugs, ceremoniously, we each took a turn, saying goodbye to Mike one by one. I was aware of a young couple huddled together against the lighthouse, and a group of teenagers just beyond, solemnly watching, respecting our private family moment. After each family member let Mike go, there was still some ashes left. Bob and I walked to the pier's edge together, and he let the last of Mike's ashes fly. I think many people at a time like this look for a sign, an image in the clouds, a voice in the wind, something to let them believe their loved one is still with them. Bobby turned and hugged me. We got our sign a second later as a huge wave crashed over the pier. It was the kind of wave that lighthouse photographers wait for, trying to capture its power on film. I felt Bobby embrace me tighter, bracing us against the wave's impact. When it passed, we were left still standing, completely drenched in cold water. Looking at each other and gasping for air, we burst into laughter. Bob looked skyward and shouted into the wind, "Good one, Mike," which, by the way, is really highly edited of what he actually said. Our brother had finally gotten in the last laugh as the South Haven Lighthouse stood over us, a silent witness to this moment in our family's history and forever part of our memory.
A point about Ben that demonstrates what kind of a man he is. In the 50s, he worked for Standard Coil out of Bangor. And his coworker, a young coworker, had a wife and 2 children, was being let go. And Ben at the time was single, and he said, "Take me instead." And I doubt in today's climate of people being let go, you'd find people with that generous of a heart. Nevertheless, they let him go. This was on a Friday, and on Tuesday he went to City Hall after a tip from a grocery store clerk heard that City Hall was hiring. And he found out that an engineering job was open, but he had no engineering background at all. But they asked him to do a drawing, and based on that, he was hired and told that we'll train you on the job. And so this is how he started his 34-year career of working for South Haven as an engineer. He picked up a lot, he said, from engineering students on the weekend, and then just on-the-job training. Now, the ravines that existed in South Haven were a natural storm and sewer drain before buildings and settled civilization led them to be tiled, filled in, or built on, or paved over. There are still some that exist, but a few interesting ones are literally buried in history and buried in the earth. I want you to imagine for a moment that there is no city hall. And imagine that the Dairy Queen and the parking lot are not there. Imagine that the parking lot is in an embankment that looks down into the ravine. Look down on a healthy crop of ragweed about 9 feet tall and about as thick as a small tree trunk growing in the rich silt. I think, oh my God, my allergies. Also see a rather dilapidated two-story building. Ben said that after a big snowstorm one year, snow was dumped from the streets down into this ravine, and at one time the pile was about 20 feet deep, 180 feet long, and 75 to 80 feet wide, and the snow was still melting in September. Now, before and after the storm, snow from the streets was dumped in the river, Black River, until the DNR stopped this. All right, from Dairy Queen, I want you to cross Phoenix to the Visitors Bureau. Imagine that there is no Visitors Bureau. Instead, you are standing on an embankment that looks across the ravine to another bank. There is no, I lost my place here. There's no cabana cuts, no props gift store, and there is a sidewalk built on a steel trestle bridge that spans the ravine. Below you is a creek running through the ravine. On either side of this creek is Morning Glory Park. The park ran from Phoenix to Huron Street, and sometime in the late 40s or 50s, about 150 feet was filled in to make Dyckman Park, where the outdoor clock is now. At that time, or shortly after, the rest was filled in where the pavilion and the parking lot currently exist, and that was the end of Morning Glory Park, which, according to Ben, was really a very pretty little park. The dilapidated building and the bridge were removed, and the ravine was filled in with dirt, along with 115 wood piles, large old oaks and maple trees that were cut down when Phoenix and Broadway were widened, and City Hall was built on top of that in 1973. So think of that when you look at City Hall, sitting on top of a ravine. South of Huron to Michigan was an unkept ravine between School Street and about 100 feet east of Center, back of the old Aldo Hotel, which was, in more recent times, the Village Market Administrative Offices. The ravine was also filled with foundry slag and some dirt, and an A&P constructed a grocery store there on the site that is now the Wolverine Hardware. Most people know that the loft condos on Broadway are site of the old Central School. But did you know that the northwest corner of the school was part of a filled-in ravine and became a playground and gym area of the school? A 5-foot platform and a wooden slide with sides was constructed on it, thinking like a precursor of the luge run. They iced it over in the winter to use as a slide down into the area that is now known as Bear Park behind the condo lofts. After the slide was done away with, the fire department made an area to hold water for an ice rink for skating. The importance of the ravines to the city was that they all ran downhill. They made good avenues for sanitary and storm ditches, both of which ran into the Black River. But around 1928, the sewer plant was constructed. Various parts of the storm and sewer lines were tiled and rerouted to the sewer plant. Ben said outside of the plant were sludge beds at the time the Michigan fruit canners existed there, and tomato seeds sprouted into wonderful tomato plants that the people readily took for their gardens. Lovely bit of history that we don't have anymore. About 100 feet east of Kalamazoo Street in Van Buren seemed to have been the village dump before the street was put in. When the city did a storm sewer rebuild in the area, it was like a treasure hunt for old bottles. The dump, the city golf course, and the airport were in the area of the armory on Aylworth and Lincoln School. This was considered way out in the country. Now, as an aside, CHERI BRENNER, who's going to be up next, she told me that she lived in a family home in back of the current Burger King on Sunset Drive. It looked over a ravine, and someone told her that her house was built. She thought it was built on a hole of the golf course, the 19th hole, she thought. So the golf course came clear up to there. Oh, was that it? Oh, okay. Oh, so it was the last. So it was the 9th one. Okay, all right. Thank you. When I asked Ben, was it fun, working on as the bridge tender? It seemed that would be, letting the bridge go up and the boats go in. And he said, no, the most fun were the girls. And I said, how so? He said the girls would have drinks at Captain Lou's, then cross the bridge going to the bar on Broadway that is now Gino's. He said shortly after, the same number of boys would follow the girls. Then the girls and boys would reverse the trip, going back to Captain Lou's. The best part, and you'll have to ask him when you see this, was the girls would flash him.
The name of mine is As the Stomach Turns, etc., etc. I was born at the South Haven Community Hospital. Dr. Penoyer delivered me. He was our family doctor. Charles and Jean Catt were my parents. My siblings were Judy and Ken Catt, and my grandparents were Murray and Alice Catt, who lived on the other side of our U driveway. It was not far enough away to keep Grandma from knowing what we were doing, though. Grandma Catt read her daily devotions from the Daily Word every day. She was very active in the Ladies' Aid at the McDowell United Methodist Church. Once a month, she would go to the South Haven Community Hospital and roll bandages. Her parents, my great-grandfather and mother, came right from Glasgow, Scotland. She had 2 sisters and 3 brothers. She always referred to them as Sister Margaret, Sister Mary, Brother John, Brother Stuart, and Brother Andrew. She was very proper. She would never admit that anything of hers ever did anything that wasn't right. When Brother Stuart would come to visit Grandma, he would sit in his car with the door open, drinking something from a brown bag. We could see him from our house. Grandma would say it was corn syrup. Cough syrup, sorry. My dad, of course, would say, Ma, that isn't cough syrup, he's drinking liquor. Of course, Grandma always said, it is not liquor, in her indignant response. Sister Mary was a teacher in Kalamazoo. She was a typical old main school teacher. The only children that were perfect were Brother John's children, Mary Joanne and John Jr., and Ronnie Chase, Sister Margaret's grandson. We got tired of hearing about them all the time. I remember one time we visited Sister Mary in Kalamazoo. She made us take a nap, which we did not nap anymore. She had this beautiful doll on the bed where I had to nap, and she told me, do not touch the doll. That was so cruel to have you nap on this bed and stare at this doll the whole time. But I think I did touch it. Grandma had this black cat called Blackie. He would disappear for a month at a time, and he would come back skinny and all beat up. Grandma would be all upset because she figured someone had him shut up. My dad would tell her that her cat was out tomming, And she was real indignant and responded, "He was not." She couldn't even admit her cat might be messing around. My dad gave Grandma a hard time. She would complain about her arthritis hurting, and he would jokingly say, "You've been messing around with those rightus boys again, Ma?" And she would say, "I have not." My brother and I were in and out of their house all the time, playing hide and seek or playing some kind of a game, or just to say hi. They never ever got after us for anything. We're always welcome no matter if they had company or not. Of course, Grandma was usually sitting on her stool in the kitchen, listening on someone else's telephone call. That was her social life. She would shush us to be quiet. She always had candy in a dish in her glass cabinet, and if we stood and looked at it long enough, Grandpa would give us a piece. It worked every time. My brother and I still laugh about it today. Whenever we were going somewhere, Grandma would be going with us. Mother would say, "Call your grandma and tell her we'll be around to pick her up." Grandma's always said, "Okay, I'll get my dress on." That is a cat phrase I hope never dies. Grandma would sit in her slip until she got the phone call from us to pick her up. Grandma was really nosy, and that really irritated my mother. She found out what we were doing by listening on our telephone calls. If Mother took us school shopping, she would park the car on the east side of the house and say, "Okay, hurry up, get inside and run your packages upstairs." Sure enough, here comes Grandma, playing like she didn't know where we'd been. When we started dating, that really kept them busy. Grandma always knew when we had a date, with whom, and what time of pickup. You would see both them in the kitchen window. They'd leave the TV on so you could see their silhouettes. Grandma first, she was bigger than Grandpa, and then Grandpa. Then they would move to the living room door, which had 3 windows in it, and there would be Grandma in the tallest window and Grandpa in the shortest, to watch us when we drove by their house. When they did away with the party line, Grandma lost control of what we were doing. But she still seemed to know a lot. Grandpa's mother died when he was a baby. His father, Myron Benjamin Cat, known as M.B. Cat, took him to Bangor to live with his sister, Harriet Cat. M.B. lived in Martin, and he sold windmills for a business. Harriet was called Aunt Hat. She was a school teacher in Bangor, and there's an elementary school dedicated to her in Bangor because she was so instrumental in education. M.B. Cat acquired the property on Adams Road in Casco Township, and on 109th where the farm was. M.B. built Cedar Bluff Resort on Adams Road. I have the last original brochure of that resort, and this is what it says. On the cover it says, Cedar Bluff Resort, M.B. Cat Proprietor, the picturesque Cedar Bluff Resort by the sea. As the conduct of this resort is strictly informal and homelike. We do not advise anyone to come here with expectation of being requested to be dressed up for all occasions. Picturesque Cedar Bluff consists of 130 acres of grove, fruit, vegetables, stock farm, and with 1/2 mile frontage on Lake Michigan. Cedar Bluff affords a place to rest and grow strong at reasonable rates. If you are interested or if you're contemplating spending a portion of your time in the country, the following fact about Cedar Bluff Resort are cited for your information. Ours is a place for rest. For the reason our guests consider comfort before style. You will always find a congenial, highly respectable class of people here. Our dining room is on first floor overlooking the lake, and it is light and cool. Our table is supplied with plain, wholesome food, which is always fresh, as we produce our own vegetables, meat, eggs, and milk. We have rooms supplied with hot and cold running water, detached bath. Outside the rooms is 400 feet of porch beside the beautiful cedar grove. Our house and grounds are supplied with pure, sparkling water pumped from a strata of gravel 136 feet below the surface. It is the above facts which have made Cedar Bluff popular. Our rates are $2 per day, $8 to $12 per week. If 2 persons occupy 1 bed, it's $7 to $10 per week for each person. We have large, well-furnished rooms with hot and cold running water, $12 per week and $10 per week each for 2 persons. Oops. We have other rooms with detached bath, hot and cold running water at $10 a week and $8 each for 2 persons. We have other very good rooms at $8 per week, $7 each for 2 persons, and still others that are not plastered at $7 per week. We have suites of rooms and rooms with 2 beds at the above rate. Tables, same to all. Children under 10 years of age, $6 when they occupy the bed with an adult. Otherwise, the full rate will be charged. We meet the crowds at the afternoon boat, but do not meet the early boat. However, it is well to advise me in advance the time you leave Chicago. I will meet you at the dock or at the depot. After looking and inquiring in case you fail to locate the Cedar Bluff bus or auto which is marked MB Cat or Cedar Bluff, you can step into the booth in the dock and phone Cedar Bluff. The above prices include transportation and hand baggage on regular trips. Extra trips will be charged for. We at all times do our utmost to make matters pleasant and satisfactory to all. It is entirely on these considerations that we depend for a continuation of the patronage of our guests. We have teams and autos for driving in the country at reasonable rates. For benefit of those seeking quiet and rest, we insist on having it quiet after 10 p.m. First come, first served. Only to the short resort season, we do not reserve rooms. However, we will always take care of you. As people are coming and going, you can get a room in a day or 2 that will suit you. To those who have not visited Cedar Bluff before, after giving us a few days trial and are not entirely satisfied, we'll assist you in locating it some other place in this vicinity. Cedar Bluff cannot be fully appreciated without seeing it. You cannot do us a greater favor than to tell your friends about it. We have no barker at the dock. We have lots for sale. Also, we'll build cottages to sell on installment plan. Hoping we may welcome you to Cedar Bluff, we remain very truly MB Cat and Son. Transportation, South Haven line, fine steel boats. Post office box address, South Haven RFD 2. Kibbe phone, which connects with Bell long distance, sends telegrams to South Haven and they will be phoned to Cedar Bluff. We do not advertise. Grandma Cat and her sisters worked at the resort. They didn't get to go home very often because it was quite a buggy ride from Cedar Bluff to Bangor. They were there the whole summer. Grandma and Grandpa met at the resort. I often wonder if they fooled around on the beach at night. It is hard for me to visualize that. The resort burnt down in 1914. The lots and cottages that were mentioned in the brochure was the beginning of Cedar Bluff Park that still exists strong today. And I have 2 of my friends here tonight. I mentioned earlier about Aunt Hat and the school dedicated to her. Well, we have another famous person on the cat side of the house. She is CHERI Nation Cat, or CHERI Chapman Cat. She married George Cat in 1890. She was quite radical. She was big in women's suffrage. She threw a chair through the White House window. My sister reminded me of her because Judy always had some causes she was always supporting. I always cringed when she would want me to help her efforts. I always bowed out and got away as far as I could from the issue. We always joked about Grandpa having 9 lives because his last name was Cat. He got into more trouble. I remember when he cut his thumb off husking corn. That stub became a weapon because he would always always trying to tickle us with it in our ribs. My mother drove over him with the hay wagon. A big fertilizer tank fell on him in the field, and many, many other things. He was always cleaning the push lawnmower. Then he would put the blades back on upside down and couldn't figure out why it wouldn't cut. My dad, as usual, came to the rescue. My poor dad trying to farm, and between Grandpa and one of us kids doing something stupid. It is a wonder he didn't lose his faculties. Grandpa's job was to bring the car around to their house. The garage was up by our house. There was usually some kind of farm equipment sitting by the barn. No matter what it was or where it was at, he would always back into it. We learned not to leave keys in any of the automobiles because he would take off in them and go to Glen or wherever. He always went out to the mailbox to get the paper, and he would stand by the side of the road reading the paper, swaying back and forth. I feared one day he's going to get hit. One day I looked over at the farm and there were cars lined up all along the road in front of their house. I figured he probably got hit, so I called Grandma. What's going on? She said, oh, Grandpa's got the farm on fire. There were 3 volunteer fire departments there. He and Mr. Black decided to burn the old pear trees down that my dad had pushed out and put in a pile. Well, wind came up and the good Lord was with him that day because the fire burnt right around the propane gas tank and around their house, up all around the barn, and didn't touch one building. Oh boy, that was a big one. We didn't have any first cousins. My mother was an only child. Uncle Ben was killed in World War II, and Aunt Lucille didn't have any children. But we had second cousins, Mike and Chuck Kavanaugh, who we were very, very close with. They were my mom's first cousins. They lived in Gary when they were young, and it was so much fun when they came to visit. The first thing we did was head to the barn. We played cowboys. If you got shot, you had to count to 50, then you were alive again. Chuck got in trouble with his BB gun as soon as he stepped out of their car. He shot a hole in the dog dish. We had some old hens in the pasture. They didn't lay eggs anymore, and they were too old and tough to eat. Well, we had a cowboy thing going on, and we needed to hang someone for robbing the bank. So we put a board between the barn and the corn crib. Then we got the idea to catch the chickens. I think there were about 4 of them. And we strung them up with binder twine until their death. I don't remember how we got caught doing that, but oh boy, did we get in trouble. It took me weeks to get that out of my head, seeing those chickens hanging there. But they robbed the bank, so they deserved it. We always spent a lot of time at the beach when they visited in the summer. We would stay all day sometimes. They were used to public swimming pools, which I knew nothing about. They were excellent swimmers. In 1956, we got a black and white Motorola television from G's Electric in Fenville. Wow, that was really something. Sunday evening was when we watched TV together. It was Lassie, Disney, and the Ed Sullivan Show. You've heard a lot about my family. We were country bumpkins. We didn't have a lot, but life was good. I want my grandchildren to know about their ancestors and some history about the past. I lost my best friend of 26 years, July 15th this summer, my beloved horse Laramie. I still look for her in the pasture. But I have my husband, my children, and my grandchildren, whom are the love of my life. But those grandchildren give me a hard time, and I don't deserve it. We live across from Cedar Bluff Park on Blue Star Highway. Our property was part of the 130 acres that were mentioned in the resort brochure.